It was a Friday evening, and the autumn chill had settled into the bones of my small one-bedroom apartment. I had just finished folding laundry when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from my son, Daniel. "Hey, Mom, can you come over tomorrow morning? We've got plans all weekend, and we need someone to watch Lily and Max." I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar pit in my stomach. Not because I didn't love spending time with my grandchildren, Lily with her wild curls and endless curiosity, and Max whose laughter could light up even the darkest room, but because this request wasn't an isolated incident. This was the third weekend in a row, and every week it felt like Daniel expected me to drop everything for him, as if my life revolved solely around his convenience. I sighed deeply, typing out my response carefully. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before finally landing on the words. "Daniel, I'm sorry, but I can't this weekend. I have plans." Plans, that was what I called them now. Not obligations or excuses, but plans. Plans to sit by myself with a cup of tea and a book. Plans to take a long walk through the park where no one would demand anything of me. Plans to simply exist without being needed. His reply came almost instantly, sharp and biting. "What plans? You're retired, Mom. What could you possibly be doing?" There it was, the entitlement dripping off each word, the implication that my retirement meant I should live only to serve him, his wife Emma, and their 2 children. For years, I'd done exactly that, stepping in whenever they needed childcare, cooking meals for them during busy weeks, offering advice, which they rarely took, and quietly footing some of their utility bills when things got tight. But lately, something inside me had begun to shift. Maybe it was age catching up to me, or maybe it was the growing realization that I'd spent decades prioritizing everyone else's needs above my own. Whatever it was, I couldn't keep going like this. I set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, closing my eyes. The truth was, I loved my grandchildren more than anything in the world. They were the bright spots in my otherwise quiet existence since losing their grandfather 10 years ago. But loving them didn't mean sacrificing my dignity or my sanity for their sake. I deserved better than to be treated like a default babysitter, summoned whenever it suited them. The next message came less than 5 minutes later, and this time it wasn't a question. "Fine. If you don't want to help, then maybe you don't need us either. Starting next month, I won't be able to cover your allowance anymore. You'll have to figure out how to pay your bills yourself." My heart sank, though not entirely out of surprise. Daniel had always been quick to leverage money as a weapon. He paid for my rent, utilities, and groceries, a gesture he framed as generosity, but which I knew was really about control. Over the years, he'd made it clear that these payments weren't gifts. They were strings attached to expectations. And now those strings were tightening. I picked up the phone again, hesitating for a moment, before replying, "That's fine, Daniel. I'll manage." As soon as I hit send, a strange sense of calm washed over me. Fear lingered at the edges, of course. Fear of financial instability, of loneliness, of starting over at 72 years old. But beneath it all, there was also a flicker of defiance. A whisper telling me that perhaps it was time to reclaim pieces of myself I'd given away long ago. The following Monday, another text arrived, colder than the last. "Also, I won't be covering your electric bill anymore. Or water. Let me know when you realize how hard it is to survive without help." This time, I didn't respond. Instead, I sat staring at the message for several minutes, letting anger simmer beneath the surface. Anger, not just at Daniel, but at myself for allowing him to treat me this way for so long. How had I let my son reduce me to this? To someone who relied on him for basic necessities, trading my autonomy for scraps of approval? But buried deep within that anger was also clarity. Clarity that reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. The old cabin in the woods. The cabin had belonged to my late husband, Thomas. Nestled on 5 acres of forested land 2 hours outside the city, it had been our sanctuary, a place where we escaped the noise of everyday life and built memories together. After Thomas passed away, I stopped visiting. The thought of returning alone was too painful, so I locked it up and left it behind, untouched for nearly a decade. Now, as I sat in my silent apartment, an idea began to form. What if I went back to the cabin, not to live permanently, necessarily, but to evaluate its potential? Perhaps it wasn't too late to breathe new life into that forgotten piece of our past. Over the next few days, I packed a suitcase with essentials and drove out to the property. The drive itself was cathartic. The winding roads lined with fiery red and gold leaves reminding me of simpler times. When I pulled into the driveway, the sight of the cabin brought tears to my eyes. It looked weathered and worn, its wooden siding faded under years of neglect, but it was still standing, still waiting. Inside, dust coated every surface and cobwebs hung like delicate curtains from the ceiling beams. Yet despite the decay, the structure remained sturdy. The fireplace still worked, the plumbing sputtered to life after a bit of coaxing, and the roof showed no signs of leaks. With some cleaning and minor repairs, it could easily become livable again. As I stood in the middle of the living room, memories flooding back, inspiration struck. Why stop at making it livable? Why not turn it into something more? By the end of the week, I had listed the cabin on Airbnb, and within days, bookings started rolling in. It had been 3 weeks since I moved into the cabin. 3 weeks of solitude, self-discovery, and for the first time in years, a sense of control over my own life. The Airbnb bookings were steady thanks to glowing reviews from guests who loved the rustic charm and serene surroundings. I'd even started a small garden out back, planting herbs and flowers that reminded me of Thomas. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But as they say, no good deed or success goes unpunished. One crisp October morning, as I sat on the porch sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the treetops, a car pulled up the gravel driveway. At first, I thought it might be an early check-in for one of my Airbnb guests. But when Daniel stepped out of the car, followed by Emma and the kids, my stomach tightened. This wasn't a social visit. "Mom," Daniel called out, his tone clipped but forced cheerful. "We need to talk." I didn't invite them inside. Instead, I stayed seated, clutching my mug tightly. "About what?" He hesitated, glancing at Emma, who held Lily's hand while Max clung to her leg. They looked uncomfortable, out of place amidst the chirping birds and rustling leaves. Finally, Daniel spoke. "We heard about this." He gestured vaguely toward the cabin. "You're running a business now? Without telling us?" Ah, so that was it. News travels fast in small towns, especially when your estranged son starts asking questions around town. Someone must have mentioned seeing strangers come and go from the property. Word got back to him, and here we were. "I didn't think I needed permission," I replied coolly. "Besides, you made it clear I shouldn't rely on you anymore. Turns out I don't have to." His jaw tightened. "You could have told me. We're family. You don't keep things like this from your own flesh and blood." I raised an eyebrow. Funny coming from the man who cut off his mother's allowance and utility bills because she said no once. Emma shifted uncomfortably, whispering something to Daniel. He ignored her, stepping closer. Look, Mom, we're not here to fight. We just didn't realize how serious you were about being independent, about cutting ties. Cutting ties? I echoed, incredulous. You're the one who kicked me out, Daniel. You're the one who treated me like some kind of servant instead of your mother. Don't act surprised that I'm doing fine without you. For a moment, he looked genuinely taken aback. Then his expression hardened again. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, let's get down to business. This cabin, it belongs to the family. To me. Dad left it to both of us, remember? My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face impassive. Of course, he'd bring this up. I'd known deep down that he might try to claim ownership eventually. What I hadn't expected was how quickly he'd resort to manipulation. That's not true, I said firmly. Thomas left everything to me. You know that. Daniel smirked, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Actually, I dug up the will last week. It says right here that the cabin is part of the estate, and since I'm your only child, I technically have rights to half of it. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Had he really gone through the trouble of finding the will just to challenge me? Was he that desperate to take away the one thing I'd managed to reclaim? And what do you plan to do with your half? I asked, my voice icy. Move in? Start your own Airbnb? Or are you just trying to punish me for standing up to you? His smirk faltered slightly. Neither. I just think it's only fair that we share the profits. After all, you wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me letting you stay in my apartment all those years. Letting me stay. As if I'd begged for scraps of kindness from him. As if I owed him anything. I stood up slowly, setting my mug down on the wooden railing. You're wrong about a lot of things, Daniel, but you're especially wrong about this cabin. Go ahead and read the will again. Carefully. Because if memory serves, there's a clause in there that gives me full discretion over any property decisions after Thomas's death. His eyes widened slightly, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He hadn't expected me to know the details so well. Truthfully, neither had I, at least not until recently. After moving back to the cabin, I'd spent hours going through old papers and documents, determined to protect myself from exactly this kind of sabotage. And sure enough, buried in the fine print of Thomas's will was a provision granting me sole authority over the cabin, a safeguard he'd put in place, knowing I might need a refuge someday. Well, I pressed, crossing my arms. Did you miss that part, or did you just assume I wouldn't fight back? Daniel's face flushed red, and for a moment I thought he might explode. Instead, he took a step back, visibly deflating. This isn't over, he muttered more to himself than to me. Then, turning to Emma, he snapped, "Let's go." As they piled back into the car, I noticed Lily looking at me through the window, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. For a brief second, guilt pricked at my heart. She and Max didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this mess. But then I remembered. Daniel had brought them here to intimidate me, to make me feel guilty for standing my ground. That realization hardened my resolve. Once their car disappeared down the driveway, I sank back into my chair, exhaling deeply. My hands trembled slightly, but I felt a strange sense of triumph. For years, I'd let Daniel walk all over me, convinced that love meant sacrifice. Now I understood something different. Love also meant setting boundaries and enforcing them. It had been a month since Daniel's visit to the cabin, a month of silence from him, Emma, and the kids. At first, I worried that he might try something drastic, like contacting Airbnb directly or filing a legal challenge, but nothing came of it. Perhaps he realized the will was ironclad, or perhaps he was biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. In the meantime, life at the cabin flourished in ways I never imagined. The bookings rolled in steadily, each guest leaving behind glowing reviews about the peaceful surroundings, the cozy interior, and the thoughtful touches I'd added. Fresh flowers on the dining table, homemade jam in the kitchen, and a handwritten welcome note on the bedside stand. Slowly but surely, the income began to pile up. Not enough to make me rich, but more than enough to cover my expenses and then some. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from Daniel's expectations. Free from the weight of always being needed. And most importantly, free to rediscover who I was outside of being a mother, grandmother, and caregiver. But freedom has a way of stirring up old memories and new questions. One crisp November morning, as I tended to the garden out back, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart sank when I looked up and saw Daniel's car pulling into the driveway. This time, he was alone. He stepped out of the vehicle looking disheveled, unshaven, his shirt untucked, dark circles under his eyes. Gone was the confident man who had once strutted into my apartment demanding explanations. In his place stood someone far less sure of himself. "Mom," he said softly, approaching me cautiously. "Can we talk?" I set down my gardening gloves and crossed my arms. "About what, Daniel? You've made your feelings pretty clear." He winced at my tone, but pressed on. I wanted to apologize for everything, for showing up here unannounced last time, for treating you like you owed us something, for cutting off your allowance and bills. His words caught me off guard. An apology? From Daniel, it wasn't something I'd expected, at least not this soon. Still, I kept my guard up. Apologies were cheap if they weren't backed by action. I appreciate that. I said evenly, "But why now? What changed?" He hesitated, glancing around at the cabin before meeting my gaze. I realized I messed up. Big time. When you stopped calling, stopped asking for help, I started noticing things, like how you're actually doing better without me, without us. His admission stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He hadn't noticed my strength until it became inconvenient for him. "You think I'm doing well?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. What gave it away? The fact that I'm running a successful business, or that I haven't begged you to take me back? He flinched. Both. Neither. "Look, Mom, I was wrong. About everything. About the cabin, about the money, about how I treated you. I thought you needed me. But now I see, maybe I was the one who needed you." There it was, the raw honesty I'd waited years to hear. Yet even as part of me softened, another part remained wary. Words were easy. Actions were harder. "So what now?" I asked. "You expect me to forgive you and go back to the way things were?" "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "No, I don't expect anything. I want to fix this. Somehow. Maybe I can help with the cabin, market it online, manage the bookings, whatever you need." I studied him carefully. His offer sounded sincere, but I couldn't ignore the ulterior motive lurking beneath the surface. Was he truly trying to make amends, or was he still trying to insert himself into my life to regain control? "I don't need your help, Daniel," I said firmly, "but thank you for offering." His shoulders slumped, defeated. "I get it. I messed up. Badly. All I can do is keep trying to make it right. We stood there in silence for a moment, the tension between us thick yet fragile. Finally, I spoke. If you really mean what you're saying, prove it. Not with grand gestures or promises, but with consistency. Respect my boundaries. Treat me like an equal, not a resource to exploit. He nodded slowly. Okay, I can do that. Later that evening, as I sat by the fireplace sipping tea, I replayed our conversation in my mind. Part of me wanted to believe Daniel's apology was genuine, that he truly regretted his actions and wanted to repair our relationship. But another part of me, a wiser, warier part, knew better than to trust too easily. The next day, I received a text from him. Hey, Mom. Just wanted to say thanks for hearing me out yesterday. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm going to try. Really try. Love you. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you, Daniel. Let's take it one step at a time. Over the following weeks, Daniel kept his word. He didn't push for involvement in the cabin business or demand access to my finances. Instead, he sent occasional updates about Lily and Max, sharing photos and stories of their latest adventures. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this newfound humility might be temporary. People rarely change overnight, especially those accustomed to wielding power over others. So while I allowed myself to hope for reconciliation, for healing, I also resolved to remain vigilant. Because the truth was, I no longer needed Daniel's approval or support. I had built a life for myself, one filled with purpose, independence, and joy. Whether or not he chose to respect that life would ultimately determine the future of our relationship. And if he failed to honor my boundaries again, well, I already knew exactly where to draw the line. The cabin had become more than just shelter. It was my spine, my breath, the quiet declaration that I was done living like a guest in my own life. The autumn snow had just begun to sprinkle over the treetops when Daniel texted me again. This time it was short. Can we come by this weekend? Just to visit. I stared at the message. A visit? No strings? No requests for childcare, money, favors? For once, I allowed hope to trickle in, but I didn't reply right away. I needed to think, because the truth was I wasn't afraid of confrontation anymore. I was afraid of slipping back into the woman I used to be, the one who gave everything and asked for nothing. They arrived late Saturday morning. Daniel, Emma, Lily, and Max all bundled in coats and trailing behind them the smell of city air and unspoken tension. I greeted the children warmly. I will always love those kids. Always. But I made no move to open the door wide. We sat out on the porch instead. Emma offered me a small tin of cookies. I accepted it with a polite nod but said nothing. Daniel broke the silence. We're trying, Mom, he said. I know I have a long way to go, but I wanted you to know we appreciate what you've done. We didn't before, but we do now. I nodded slowly. And? He looked confused. And that's it. We just want to be part of your life again. I tilted my head. As long as I stay available to you, or even if I choose not to. Daniel looked down at his hands. I want to say both, but I know that's not what I've shown. At least he was being honest. Emma spoke up then. This place, it's beautiful, Linda. You've really made it something special. I smiled. It always was. Thomas built it with his own hands. He left it to me because he knew I'd need it one day. And I did. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. We were hoping if there was ever a weekend we could stay out here. Just us, the family. Maybe you could let us use it. Just once or twice a year. There it was. Not an outright ask for money. Not a demand. But a toe back into entitlement. I stood up, taking a slow breath. I'm going to say this once, and I need you both to hear me clearly, I said, my voice calm but firm. This cabin is not a vacation rental for family convenience. It's my home, and it's also my livelihood. What I built here, I built on my own, after being left out in the cold, literally, by you, Daniel. Daniel opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. No, you don't get to rewrite what happened. You punished me for setting boundaries. You used money and affection as weapons, and now that you see I don't need them, you want back in. I understand that. I even expected it. He flinched. But here's the thing, I continued. I don't run a daycare. I don't run a charity. And I don't owe you free stays or second chances. If you want to be in my life, you show up with respect, not expectation. Emma nodded slowly. You're right. Daniel didn't say anything. He just looked at me, that same calculating look I'd seen when he cut off my water and lights, when he said I'd realize how hard it was without him. Except now, he was the one realizing. Later that night, after they left, I lit the fireplace and sat in my favorite chair, wrapped in one of Thomas's old flannel blankets. A soft ping came from my phone. It was a message from Daniel. I guess I needed you to be poor to feel powerful. I'm sorry, I see it now. For the first time in a long time, I cried. Not out of sadness, out of relief. He was finally beginning to understand. But whether or not that would ever be enough, that part was still uncertain. Winter settled over the cabin like a hush. Snow draped the roof in thick white blankets. The fireplace crackled like a faithful old friend, and bookings kept coming in. I had expected it to be seasonal, but people didn't just want shelter. They wanted solace. They wanted what I had quietly built. And I had built it, without Daniel, without anyone. I still reread his message sometimes. I guess I needed you to be poor to feel powerful. I'm sorry, I see it now. The honesty in it took years to come, but even with it, I knew something I didn't know before. Apologies don't guarantee change, and forgiveness isn't the same as restoration. The real test came 2 weeks later. Daniel asked if they could come for the weekend, not to stay in the cabin, but to reconnect. He wanted to bring the kids, let them see where Grandma lives now. I said yes. I thought I was ready. When they arrived, the kids raced up to me, shouting, "Grandma!" and hugging my legs like they used to. My heart melted in spite of everything. We made hot cocoa. Lily drew me a picture of the cabin with stick figures labeled me and you and our happy fire. But when I stepped outside to bring in firewood, I overheard Daniel talking to Emma on the phone. It's just a matter of time. If we keep showing up, she'll soften. I mean, what's she gonna do? Cut us out of the will? It hit like a slap. So that was it. That was it. This wasn't healing. This was strategy. He hadn't changed. He'd just learned how to wear the right mask. The last thing I did was write a letter to Daniel. It was short. I love you. I always will. But I won't be manipulated anymore. I'm not angry. I'm awake. And awake people don't live on other people's terms. I wish you well, but the door to my life now comes with a key only respect can turn. I didn't send it. I kept it in the same drawer where I kept Lily's drawing, because maybe one day, when the mask finally slips for good, he'll be ready to really listen. But if not, that's okay too. I'm not building this life to be claimed. I'm building it to be lived.